Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone. And now, here is your host, the lovely, delightful, insightful, and all-around great gal, Ms. Barbara DeLong.
Good afternoon, everybody. That intro always puts a smile on my face. That was Ken Quiet Hawk, and he came out of retirement to do that intro for me. His website is nativestorytellers.com, and I encourage you to go and check it out. It's a fabulous website, and it's also a great way to learn a little bit about the Native Storytellers. Today I am so excited. I have Dan Willis with me, and we're going to be talking about some very unusual, wonderful material. Let me give you some of his background. Dan Willis is one of the Disclosure Project's top secret military witnesses that testified at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. in 2001 in front of every major media, a world disclosure event which was asking for a congressional hearing in order to bring forth the witness scientists within the Black projects who could release the technologies derived from extraterrestrial reverse engineering that had been hidden for over 70 years that could stop further damage to our planet. But instead, the message was sanitized by a controlled mainstream media. From his personal first-hand experiences, as well as looking into the historical indicators that have been purposefully omitted from our education system, which reveal an infiltration of unwarranted influence operating behind the secrecy established for our national security system, a system that is used to control the public's indoctrination that forms their perception of the agreed-upon reality. This is done in order to hide their illegal operations and why they fear disclosing the truth about the extraterrestrial reality. Dan is an ex-radio broadcast engineer and NBC newsman. He's taken a keen interest in how the mainstream media has withheld disclosure of the full message to the public, a message based on the hundreds of credible military and intelligent witness testimonies. Dan shared with me a documentary film that is called Above Majestic. You can get it on Amazon. And I believe it's on YouTube too, but I'm not sure. But I know you can definitely get it from Amazon because that's where I watched it from. It is an amazing documentary. It chronicles what has happened over time, and it tells us and it shares with us about what's happening now and what's most probably going to happen in the future as far as the extraterrestrial presence and our knowledge of it and our ways of coping with it. So I can't tell you how exciting it is for me, because after watching this documentary, I want to share it with everybody. I want everybody to see it. If there were any way to broadcast it all, I would do that. So instead of that, I have Dan on the show. Welcome, Dan.
Barbara, what a delight to be back on your show again.
Well, it's always fun to talk to you because you have such great information. And I have to tell
you, yes.
No, you first of all, before we even get into Above Majestic, your website is probably one of the most informative websites I have ever been on. And I've been on a lot. And I think what impresses me the most about your website is, frankly, I checked out almost all of the facts you were giving for the first 50 or 60 pages, and then figured, well, they all check out. So I stopped, but you document where you get your information so that it's not just, so-and-so said to so-and-so that maybe this happened. It's you give credible information. And I think it's important for people to visit it and check out all of the information you have there. You've done an amazing amount of work. But the Above Majestic movie is just priceless. I wish I had known about it before Christmas. I would have given it as a gift to a lot of people.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I recommend that. It was when it first hit. It was on iTunes and Amazon when it first came out. It was the #1 documentary. Incredible. It had like 98% 5-star reviews. There's a hunger out there in the population for this information. People sense there's like truth has this ability to resonate. As bizarre as the truth may sound, there's something in it that connects in people's minds that, oh yeah, that connects with that, and that connects with that, and thank you for the compliment on the webmatrix.net. It was basically a movie company, a media company rather, out of Hollywood wanted me to write an article on media control in regards to the UFO ET matter and why they keep sanitizing it. And after I went to Washington and all of us, were willing to testify under oath, we each stated that with our, pretty explosive testimonies back in 2001.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out. So basically, it turned into my online notes to try to figure out for myself how this came about. And it seems like one method that appears to work well is to lay out a chronology. I went back to the year 1900 to present day, and based on the hundreds of military intelligence witness testimonies and authenticated documents as the core foundational basis in which to lay out my notes through time, it started to create a pattern. And now, today, with the release of this movie, Above Majestic, it ties in, most of what I was researching was, you could say, the 20th century witnesses and whistleblowers and all the evidence that has surfaced. But in the 21st century, witnesses started coming out, talking about being involved in these 20 and back programs, that the MILAB abductions where they be taken off into these secret space programs and stuff. And researching along with a lot of Dr. Michael Sala's material and looking at the evidence that supports this. When we went to Washington to testify back in 2001, it inspired a hacker over in the UK, Gary McKinnon, who hacked into the Naval Space Command computer systems and found the Solar Warden U.S. Navy space program, secret space program, along with non-terrestrial officers, fleet-to-fleet transfers, and they wanted to put them away for 70 years in prison. And then it wasn't until the year 2015 that William Tompkins, he's like 93, 94 years old, came out with his explosive testimony regarding the Navy basically separating back in the late 40s into their own secret program that was assisted by a Nordic extraterrestrial race that helped them greatly advance in order to counter what was going on back in the late 30s and early 40s, where Nazi Germany had developed an alliance with a reptilian race of rather predatory extraterrestrials. And this is sort of the balance. It sounds like if you take the average person that has gone through our regular schooling, our history, our education and science, everything that's been exposed on television and movies, everything your parents, bestowed upon you for knowledge, this sounds like the most ridiculous, insane, far-fetched science fiction movie that you could ever imagine. But there's a huge amount of evidence, a tremendous amount of documented evidence with William Tompkins' testimony that was working with the 29 Navy spies that were embedded into Nazi Germany that were attempting to catch up with the extreme advancement that they had over the United States government, and eventually had to enter into rather of a surrender, a treaty that happened back in 1955.
Yeah, it does sound out of this world, but the reality is that I think everyone has seen pieces of this information. I would say that 20 years ago you couldn't have done this and had it been accepted. But so many people are so much more aware. So many people are saying, wait a minute. I mean, simple things like when, who was it, Rumsfeld said that gosh, he'd misplaced about, 2.3, which became $6.5 trillion in Pentagon money. I mean, where did it go? It certainly, he didn't have it. And you see chinks in the armor of people trying to keep us in the same place. And I think one of the things in the documentary that hadn't occurred to me but did, with the fact that we have gone from just horse and carriage to cars and stuff like that in a short period of time, but we haven't progressed any further. And it makes great sense that we should have progressed further to have not have to use the fossil fuels and everything, but something must be blocking the release of the information, because certainly scientists are, people say they're 20 to 50 years ahead of what we actually know.
This is a key issue that you're bringing up, Barbara. The fact that we've had zero-point energy. In other words, every single home and business could have one of these little small units and disconnect the cables from the electrical grid, which has these wires strung all over the place for electrical power distribution throughout our country and throughout the world. That if we ever get a corona mass ejection from the sun or an EMP attack, millions of people are going to die because of our absolute dependence upon electricity for everything we use. So it's critical that people become aware that these technologies, and I can speak from first-hand experience of this, because after a congressional hearing was denied by the Bush administration, because of my technical background working with the Navy and with electronics and unconventional research as well, I volunteered to be a technical advisor and traveling around the planet. I did this for 10 years. I started out with Dr. Stephen Greer and Professor Ted Loiter, meeting with these different scientists and inventors that have like what's called over unity, type of energy devices. Many of them were murdered. Most of them received what's called a national security order, which says your invention has been deemed to be a detriment to the national security of the United States, therefore you cannot share this with anyone. Thousands, well over 5,000, probably over 6,000 of these secrecy gag orders, I guess you could call them, have been issued to people who had solutions to get off of nuclear oil and coal. We haven't needed gasoline. We haven't needed these dangerous nuclear power plants. We haven't needed air-polluting coal plants. This is like primitive, obsolete technology that we haven't needed for, 60, 70 years. And this is so critical.
During, I think it was somewhere 41 or 42, my dad was in the FBI, and he watched a demonstration of a car that they filled the tank with water and they dropped a little pill in, and the car ran. No gas. It was water with whatever was added in that pill that enabled the engine to run, no exhaust, nothing emitted. It was just energy from water. And the government bought the patent, and that's it.
One of the scientists we worked with was Stan Meyer, and Stan Meyer was able to, without even using a pill, was able to run vehicles on water, had some patents which weren't complete, but he was suicided. We attempted to acquire all his equipment, but another corporation was able to outbid us, and all the people that were involved in that have all mysteriously died. So this is...
and Tesla's notebooks are gone. I mean, and his research was in, my God, it was in time travel, it was in, anti-gravity things. I mean, Tesla had the answer to so much that is going on today, and it was squashed. And so was he.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, Trump's uncle was John Trump, who was the MIT scientist whose specialty was, high voltage electrostatic fields and things like that. He was brought in by the FBI in order to review all of Tesla's papers in the safe, to evaluate to see if there was anything of significance. And of course, publicly they said, nothing of interest or significance here, but they took it away. But there's MJ12 documents that showed that, back in 1947 when the Roswell crash and things, they brought in MIT, and he would have been one of the key scientists. So he was very aware, most likely, extreme high probability that he was aware of the extraterrestrial issue as well as the advanced technologies that Tesla had, and probably, when Trump, Donald Trump was bouncing on his knee as his little nephew, may have shared a lot of information. And it's interesting that when Trump did his inauguration speech, he said, what was it? He said, "We stand at the birth of a new millennium, ready to unlock the mysteries of space, to free the earth from the miseries of disease, and to harness the energies, industries, and technologies of tomorrow." Now, he wrote his own inauguration speech, unlike, prior presidents. The day that he did that, he did a secret memorandum that he signed to release and declassify not only the anti-aging technologies, but also the free energy technologies. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on right now, and it may be, once they get the elements of suppression that have been in positions of power that have been keeping our planet technologically hijacked, you could say, for all these decades.
Yeah.
Once these elements are replaced and eliminated, we might see these technologies being released to the public, help clean up our beautiful planet that's been abused, for so many decades.
Well, the feeling I got from the documentary was that we're right on the threshold of this. So, I would love people to understand a little of the background and then promise of what we can watch for to come, because there is, I think at one point you said this is going to be, or somebody said in the documentary, this is going to be the second American Revolution, as we start to get rid of the people who are controlling us and allow us to sort of have the freedom to think on our own, among other things, because we are programmed. There's no doubt about it. I mean, when I look at the schools and I look at the textbooks, they aren't accurate. They aren't up to date. We are holding the population in a form of suspended animation, and it's horrible. So you want to kind of go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in agreement with what you're saying, William Tompkins, who had a lot of support by High Navy Command of admirals and captains, and with a lot of documentation to support his testimony, said that there's majority of extraterrestrial races, I would say, are benevolent in nature and or benign. But there are some races that are predatory. I don't believe in, all bad or all good. I believe there's a spectrum out there, and that this particular reptilian race has been influencing and controlling this planet, according to Tompkins, over 6,000 years. And what they've done is they have gone into our complete education system and affected our understanding of history, of science, everything that we know, according to Tompkins, everything that we know in all the universities and books and everything is absolutely incorrect. And how this whole thing started with the Navy and the spies is that one of the Navy spies that was over there in Nazi Germany started to see what was going on, saw that there was, manuals that were written in, reptilian hieroglyphics, that this whole thing, he jumped the chain of command and went directly to the Secretary of the Navy, which was James Forrestal. Forrestal realized that every Navy commander, just about every Navy commander, goes through Annapolis, goes through the regular training of universities and colleges. So he selected Captain Riccobotta, who was actually what they call in the Navy a Mustang, where he came in as a seaman, and he worked himself up the ranks, up to an ensign, and then all of a sudden up to a captain. And so he only went through second grade of high school. And so he had a clear mind without all the disinformation in it. And so, curiously enough, my father, back in the early 40s, this is around 1942, was working at the same exact place that William Tompkins was working. Now, a brief history on Tompkins was that when he was 16, 17 years old, his dad used to take him down to the shipyards and take him on board the Navy craft, and he would come back because he had this photographic memory, and he would draw out exact details and create little model ships. He made a whole fleet of battleships and cruisers, aircraft carriers with little airplanes in it. Incredible detail. In fact, his dad put some of them up for sale in a Hollywood department store, and some Navy officers walked by that were in Office of Naval Intelligence, and they noticed that, oh my God, this is revealing some secret. He had such a good photographic mind that he was able to reproduce some of these secret things, and so they knew they had to bring him into Office of Naval Intelligence. So he was like 17 or so. He was brought into Naval Air Station San Diego, where Captain Riccobotta sat down with, they had 29 Navy spies that were, of course, German descent, that were embedded into Nazi Germany, that we were attempting to figure out how the Nazis developed so rapidly. They developed anti-gravity back in 1934, whereas the United States didn't develop it until 1954, 20 years later. And so they had some pictures the spies were doing, some manuals. Many were in German, and some of them were in hieroglyphics. That were that the extraterrestrials, the reptilians, actually gave the Nazi SS full, complete operational spacecraft to teach how to operate and how to reproduce. And what they did was, way before the end of the war, starting in 1938, the Nazis started to set up bases in Antarctica. And they found that there was huge geothermally warmed, kind of like a little igloo under the 2 miles of ice, giant caverns, of which some of the reptilians were already existing in. But they gave certain caverns to the Nazis in order to start this program where they started building and developing this spacecraft based on the anti-gravity. And so, which is kind of interesting, because in some of my research of looking at some of the U-boats that got sunk during World War II, one was up in Norway that had 67 tons of these sealed mercury containers that got sunk, and it's actually causing an environmental damage. Another one, probably on its way down to Antarctica, had 33 tons of mercury. That's a lot of thermometers, So what they did was they found that in their research, where Heinrich Himmler went all over, to Tibet and everywhere trying to find ancient knowledge. When they studied the ancient, Vedic writings and things, they found that the Vermanas were the flying craft of ancient India, which used these mercury engines. Well, it turns out that if you spin mercury, it creates this anti-gravity effect, counter-rotational fields. And so they were supplying the base with the mercury fuel that they needed in order to create the disc. And this Admiral Byrd, who was sent down there in 1947 in January, with it was like, how many ships? It was like 12, aircraft, a full military with aircraft and 5,000 men. They were basically defeated. They were going down there to destroy the Nazi base, but they came out of the waters, and as Joseph Stalin actually did a whole report on this, revealing much more of what happened. But they were defeated, and you had a very troubled James Forrestal who felt it important that the public know the truth about what was happening. About this time, 1946, 1947, the Rockefellers, who were tied in deeply with, along with J.P. Morgan and a lot of the banking elite, with the Nazis, and the Nazis actually had this plan called Weltanschauungskrieg, which means worldview warfare. They planned to infiltrate into the United States and create a matrix of perception, take over control of education, mainstream media, the entertainment industry, basically everything that children are raised and indoctrinated into after generation. So everything the public knows, like William Casey, the CIA director, it says, we'll know our disinformation campaign is complete when everything the public knows is false. And that's basically the condition we have today, is that, the public, as far as the history books, you see ticker tape parades, victory, we won, and we didn't win. They effectively infiltrated in through Operation Paperclip into the OSS and CIA, and they went into NASA, they went into the medical industry, as Tompkins testified. They went into the highest positions and executive positions in the pharmaceutical companies, which if you look back at Nazi Germany and the Nuremberg trials with the doctors' trials with I.G. Farben, who they broke into corporations like Bayer, who now owns Monsanto, and many other common names that we see on our television constantly with pharmaceutical commercials. They're basically a derivative of Hitler's largest financial backer, which was I.G. Farben. And so we have this entire Weltanschauungskrieg, matrix of perception, that we've been falsely born into.
And it has infiltrated, the government and every aspect of our life. And is this a group of people, or is this, is this your cabal? Or what would you call it?
Well, it goes back, in the movie, they go back to, looking at these elongated skulls, and what appears happened, according to witnesses and how they derived some of this information, is that the asteroid belt, which is made up of lots of chunks of what used to be a large planet that was destroyed. Mars got affected with that. The group basically escaped and ended up in Antarctica, and Antarctica basically was what was part of Atlantis, and they're just starting to discover some of these ancient ruins that are under the ice.
Yeah.
What happened was these elongated skulls that were called pre-Adamites that were fairly tall, they had offspring with the this kind of goes into biblical, it's like made in the image and likeness of, and and all that. They are tied into, if you go research some of the royal families of Europe and things, you go back to what's called the Deist clan, which they had portraits of them. They had elongated skulls, just like Akhenaten and Nefertiti and their children. You can see depictions in the, it's obvious these people were not from this planet. So they basically, it's the right of kings and the rulers they found that one young girl did a research and found that 42 of 43 presidents were all connected to these royal bloodlines that connect back to these beings that had elongated skulls, and this group that is tied into some of the wealthiest, the banking elite, a cabal, you could call them, that basically the Nazis are basically a fraction of this cabal. And from what I understand, that the high priesthood of Egypt, when Rome came in, they cut a deal with them, and they created a false flag with the Library of Alexandria, which had
that was fascinating.
Ancient texts, and what they did, they created a fire, but it only burned, worthless stuff. They took all of it and relocated it to the Vatican, into the Vatican Library, and anybody who understands the security and the system that's set up in the Vatican Library, it's so extreme that they have ancient texts that was before we even were on this planet. That goes back, many thousands of years, and it talks about the whole extraterrestrial. The Vatican has been deeply connected with this whole thing. And there's many MJ-12 documents that, talk about, such as one back in 1952, an MJ-12 document talks about Cardinal Francis Spellman, who was one of the head Knights of Malta for the Vatican. They were working with the president to, if there was ever mass sightings ever occurred, that they had a war plan already set up. It was called War Plan 4P, if mass sightings ever occur, in order to have containment for the Catholic Church. So there's been an interest to keep this under the wraps, going way back into the 40s and so forth.
Yeah, it's a little horrifying, and you go into, well, Eisenhower had a meeting with an extraterrestrial. He I thought theoretically had made a contract of some sort with him, an agreement with him. Was that when the Nordics came in to help us, or did they come in before then?
That's correct, Barbara. Yeah, that was February 1954 at was Murdoch Air Force Base. Now it's I forget what it's called. I think it's Andrews Air Force Base now in California. Mm-hmm. It was a meeting with the Nordics, and they warned about the other extraterrestrial race. They were wanting to help us with our spiritual development. What happened was back in 1945 when we exploded the first atomic weapon. We are connected. All stars and all planets are connected through this cosmic web of these filaments that connect this time-space web that the other extraterrestrial races, they use for communication, and they also use it for travel. And when we send out one of those pulses, it's like it sends out a message across this cosmic web to other extraterrestrial races, knowing that we have developed to a certain place technologically, but that we have not evolved spiritually yet. So our technological development outstripped our spiritual development. And so this is what started all this activity right after 1945. So basically the Nordics told Eisenhower that they wanted them to dismantle the nuclear weapons and, basically warned them. But what happened was Eisenhower was planning on having a disclosure that year to the world, to the public. But the corporations, you see, rewinding back to 1944 in Operation Eagle Flight, where the Nazis brought huge amounts of money, they set up 750 front corporations. Many of the transnational corporations, which are what you would call the military-industrial complex, that Eisenhower attempted to warn us about, were tied into this Nazi infiltration. And so what happened was, 1 year later, in February 1955, Eisenhower was forced into this treaty, which basically, because of Truman, because of what happened with Operation High Jump, where we were defeated in 1947, and then in 1952, the Nazis did a flyover of the Capitol building in July of that year, which was basically to intimidate Truman. And then, so what happened was, one of our witnesses, that was on one of the Disclosure Project witnesses, of which I'm one of over 500 witnesses, was Brigadier General Stephen Lovkin, who was on Eisenhower's staff, who became aware that he had lost control to the corporations. That was his testimony. And so what happened was, the Nazis they believed in qualitative rather than quantitative superiority. In other words, they believed in having very advanced technology rather than building a whole bunch of planes and tanks and all these ground troops and all this stuff. All they needed is having superior technology, which would, outdo anybody with thousands of planes and tanks, And so, but they needed the industrial might of the United States. They couldn't compete with the industrial might of the United States. And so they did a treaty, and part of this had to do with Operation Deep Freeze, which happened right around after 1955, where we were going down there. We were supplying the Nazis, which had the huge underground facilities, which were, by the way, still using slave labor, which they brought down there, and supplying them with all that they needed. Now, this was connected with the CIA. It was connected with the Air Force, which got created at the same time, the same date exactly that the CIA was created. And, connected with the MJ-12 operations.
What year was this?
This was 1955. And so Eisenhower, very troubled that he had lost control to these corporations, he set up, because he knew that in the future, these people can completely take over and destroy our republic, destroy our Constitution. And so he set up a secret U.S. Marine Corps intelligence unit that would, in the future, become active if it ever got to that point, which is a key idea. So he bestowed all this information over to John F. Kennedy, who was not new to any of this information, as MJ-12 documents show that the Secretary of Air Force briefed him on all this. Plus, he was in Office of Naval Intelligence. He was aware going all the way back to 1942 when they had the Battle of L.A., where there was a number of ET drone craft, and two of them were shot down. The Navy took one of them and took it over to China Lake, and the Air Force, before it turned into, it was the Army Air Force before it turned into the Air Force, over to Wright-Patterson in Ohio to reverse engineer. We were trying to catch up in 1942 with what the Nazis were doing. And while we were trying to catch up in 1942, the Nazis already are starting to build a base on the moon. And eventually they build out the settlements on the moon and Mars as well. So they were way ahead of us.
I would say. So what happened with his the Majestic 12? Is that what it was? That Eisenhower
what happened
set up?
with Majestic? Yeah, well, exactly. Truman in 1947, after a few months after the Roswell incident, Truman set up a Majestic 12 group headed by Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter as MJ-1. James Forrestal was one of the MJ-12 members who shared a lot of his information with Kennedy as they went over there in 1945 to review the Nazi technologies over in occupied Germany. What happened was when Nelson Rockefeller basically funded President Eisenhower's, campaign, and so looking for plausible deniability, he had Nelson Rockefeller, who was his vice president, restructure the CIA MJ-12 operations so that a new MJ-12 group was created, eliminating the old, and all of the Cabal members and the Nazi people that were part of this whole 1955 agreement was headed by none other than the infamous Allen Dulles, who was highly instrumental into the whole Nazi infiltration. He was the new MJ-1, or the head of MJ-12. What happened was they moved all their operations so that they can be completely secret out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where they were reverse engineering, moved it over to Area 51, which is controlled by the CIA, and S4, where it's specifically, for reverse engineering the ET craft, which, by the way, the first time Bob Lazar, who worked on the craft, ever went public, no recording devices were allowed whatsoever, and I recorded secretly, full 2 hours. I put it up on the webmatrix.net in the 1993 timeline. And, he's completely legit. And there's a movie out now on Bob Lazar, which is kind of great because it validates, because of, they tried to erase him. He said they used element 115 for the energy source. It was like decades later, almost over a decade later, Lawrence Livermore Labs discovered it was element 115 was stable, and it was exactly as Bob Lazar said. How would he know that? So anyway, back to the story. So they moved everything to Area 51 and S4 to continue on in secrecy. In the meantime, what happened was the Navy, back in the late 40s, back when 1949, before all this happened, Forrestal wanted the public to know about this. He wanted to expose all this, and the other members of the MJ-12 group that he was a part of were vehemently opposed to it, and so they had to suicide him. It was like, this was back in May of 1949. And, Kennedy was well aware of this, aware of what was going on. The Navy, in the meantime, because of a secret think tank that was set up called Operation RAND, turned into the RAND Corporation around 1948, 1949, where they kicked the Navy out and put all the money into the Air Force, where the Navy had to do their own program in secret, where they moved a lot of their operations from China Lake over to the Wasatch Mountains in Utah, where they had a huge, massive underground facility, of which William Tompkins was one of the engineers working with McDonnell Douglas for the Navy in a secret think tank that was creating these kilometer-long spacecraft based on anti-gravity. And the Navy, the Navy knew how to, by October of 1954, the Navy had anti-gravity, but what they found was that the retrofitted Navy attack submarines took out the nuclear part and put in the anti-gravity. I know this sounds bizarre, but they actually attached anti-gravity engines onto submarines. Now, the reason they used submarines was they were already familiar with it. They already were set up. It was kind of like the crews on board submarines are used to, going for 6 months at a time in these small, confined, and, it's all isolated. So they were able to go out into this galaxy, and according to Tompkins, they even went out into not only this galaxy, they went out to other galaxies with this technology, and eventually they were building these huge, massive, kilometers-long, cigar-shaped craft. And you don't have to be aerodynamic, with anti-gravity. There was no wind out there, right? And so,
yeah.
or air. And so they made these things modular. So, you could swap out. It could be a hospital ship. It could be a transport ship. It could be a scientific research vesicle. It could be, an attack vehicle. And so the Navy's got 8 of these, part of the Solar Warden program that Gary McKinnon, when he hacked into the Naval Space Command, discovered, are out there.
Well, no, wait. Wait. if we've got this huge force out there that have obviously thousands of people manning it, why have we not heard any information about it? I mean, we're talking a large number of people who are suddenly not around. And how did they? I mean, I know the answer, but I want you to tell them how do we manage to have that many people in space and then eventually coming back into the general public and nobody's talking about it?
Well, that's an excellent question, Barbara. I mean, when I went to Washington in 2001, I had a hard time. My testimony was, the Navy ships out of sea were reporting extraterrestrial craft coming out of the ocean and secret classified reports going at Chief of Naval Operations. The other people who were testifying, of which the mainstream media effectively sanitized, were talking about clearly bases on the other side of the moon, 57 different species, nuclear missiles being shut down. They plan to have future false flag events like terrorists, which happened, by the way, 4 months before the 9/11 terrorist event happened. So all this was revealed. Now, taking it even further, this took a while for me to understand until I started looking at all the documentation of Tompkins and what Gary McKinnon discovered in the computer systems, is that basically there's been a war going on between the reptilian race, who goes out and conquers other planets and enslaves them. And this goes right along with the Nazi idea. The Nazis had two objectives: one, to eliminate everybody that Hitler didn't like, everybody, the eugenics kind of plan, and to basically enslave the rest of them into factories and doing things. So what happened was, when the split happened between the Navy and the Air Force, CIA, and that whole group that entered into the agreement with the Nazis down in Antarctica, was that there was a deal made to use this Nordic technology to be able to take somebody. What they do is they prep them. They do what's called a MILAB, or it's kind of a military abduction, when a child is like 5 or 6 years old, depending on their DNA, and they kind of prep them for for this tour of duty with the secret space program. And then by the age of 16 or 17, they basically take them to an Air Force base. They fly them out to the Lunar Operations Command, which is on the moon. They sign a bunch of papers, and they commence a 20-year tour of service. And so they've done this with thousands of people. We're getting a lot of these witnesses coming out. And so what happens at the end of the 20 years, the Nordic technology is able to age regress the person back from being 20 years older back to the original age they were biologically when they were 17, blank slate them, in other words, erase their memories, and take them back through time to the point where they brought them into the program. And it's like you never knew what happened. All of a sudden, people, after 20 years goes by, when they're doing their normal timeline here on Earth, people are starting to, what's interesting is the Solar Warden program, where they started this back in 1980, ever since the year 2000, which is coincidentally when all the 21st century secret space program whistleblowers are coming out, such as Michael Ralph, Randy Kramer, Corey Good, William Tompkins talks about the 20 and Back program. You've got Naira Isley, who was involved in the secret space program. You've got there's a whole lot of people are starting to come out because their memories are starting to overlap, and so they're starting to remember. There's a certain percentage that the blank slating doesn't work 100%, and so these people are coming out and talking about their memories of being in a secret space program. And some remember, such as Corey Good, remembers tremendous amount of detail. And so this is how, because of this deal that was cut with the Nordics, in order to combat, basically it's a recruitment to combat these Dracos, Federation. I mean, it sounds like out of Star Trek, I know.
It does.
across the galaxy. And they've been keeping it secret because the Cabal, who's been in control, they put all their people in the high positions of, ever since 1954, when the, started by a former Nazi SS officer, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, started the Bilderberg meetings, which they do every single year, and they decide, they bring in the people who are most influential in media, finance, who's going to be the next president of what country. All the people are going to be on board with the agenda. They get these briefings every year at these very highly secret, very highly guarded Bilderberg meetings, which support this agenda, which this agenda has included keeping us technologically suppressed. Indications are, that we've had so many things weaponized against us, like a eugenics program with the vaccinations, with fluoride in our water, genetically modifying our food, the stuff they spray with the chemtrails, and go on and on. There's a whole lot of things that have been weaponized against us, especially the medical industry,
Oh, gosh, yeah.
So this is the situation, but the good news is, after all that, is
yes,
that there's good people in our military. It's not our government per se doing this. It's like they have put their key players, the ones that are compliant with the agenda, in key positions in, for president, like ever since they murdered Kennedy, every single president, CIA director, heads of intelligence has been denied access. And that is what brought about the National Press Club disclosure event that I partaked in as one of the 20 top secret military witnesses, to attempt to alert the public. But they, of course, they ever since Alan Dulles set up Operation Mockingbird back in 1950, they started with 400 journalists that the CIA was giving the reporters looking like independent. They have completely controlled our perceptions. And I've witnessed this firsthand in traveling across the United States in major cities where the media affiliates would come in and they would purposely use the giggle factor and sanitize this. CNN, for example, they basically said, they want to have some people think they have proof that there's life on other planets, and they want to have a congressional hearing on the reality of UFOs, not revealing anything that says that the whole reason why this event happened was because for example, when Eisenhower, after they moved their operations over to Area 51S4, he tried to gain access, and he was denied access. That's where it started. And so he threatened to go in with the First Army out of Colorado and invade Area 51 unless they had two
that's so cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, he's a five-star general. He's not going to put up with that. And so they finally let him, but he was very troubled and shared it with Kennedy. Kennedy, found all the nefarious activities that Alan Dulles was doing. That's why he fired him and replaced with CIA Director John McCone. After Dulles was fired, and after the new MJ-12 group was created, with Dulles as MJ-1, or the head of MJ-12, Dulles wrote an assassination directive that was used against Kennedy, so that when Kennedy attempted to gain access, what happened was 10 days later, after he wrote the top secret memo to McCone, trying to get access to the MJ-12 CIA operations, he was assassinated 10 days later. Then we have, it was Jimmy Carter who had a UFO experience and promised the American, they didn't really trust Carter too well, even though he was a 33rd degree Freemason. Which interesting, the Warren Commission after Kennedy's assassination was headed by none other than Allen Dulles and was made up of nothing but, 33rd degree Freemasons, and everybody remembers Kennedy's famous warning speech of, the dangers of secrecy and secret societies. Ironically, it was all 33rd degree Freemasons that later afterward, the CIA did a dispatch to all its agents saying that anybody questions the Warren Commission's lone gunman theory, to label them as a conspiracy theorist, which is it's being used today. They're still using that. That was back in 1967 they started that. So, back to the timeline of presidents and CIA directors being denied access ever since Eisenhower. George H.W. Bush denied Carter, he was the CIA director, access to the files. Then many years go by. What happened is Lawrence Rockefeller wanted Bill Clinton to reveal the UFO files, of which Sarah McClendon on his staff famously quoted Bill Clinton saying, regarding, why aren't you disclosing this? He says, well, Sarah, there's a secret government in the government, and I don't control it. And so he had his CIA director, James Woolsey, try to gain access. The CIA director was denied access. He had he realized that he couldn't go through regular military and intelligence channels. And so the person who was probably most savvy on all this was Dr. Stephen Greer, with the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, who he brought into a meeting, and Dr. Greer brought a huge stack of documents, all substantiating this reality. The CIA director, James Woolsey, said, I know the subject's real. I'm trying to figure out why the hell I can't gain access to it, and he said to him, how can we possibly disclose what we do not have access to? And so Dr. Greer, becoming aware the CIA director is being denied access, he gathered together with military advisors. They decided not to gain, just a dozen witnesses and go before the public, but rather to gain hundreds of witnesses. So from 1993 to the year 2000, when I became the 100th videotape witness, Dr. Greer had about 450 military, intelligence, and corporate witnesses. This includes admirals, generals, astronauts. And so it was the year 1997 that Dr. Greer met at the Pentagon with astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell to the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the head of intelligence, Admiral Tom Wilson. And what's interesting was he provided him a document, which was an NRO classified advisory document that lists all these unacknowledged special access program. And what an unacknowledged special access program is, it doesn't matter if you're the head of intelligence, doesn't matter if you're the president. This is how they keep these things secret. It's unacknowledged. You can't even acknowledge it exists. But back when I went to, Area 51 outside of the base to meet with Bob Lazar, that video recording, just prior to that, in 1991, there was a meeting in which the base at Nellis Air Force Base sent out a classified NRO advisory, and it listed, Magi Ops, Cosmic Ops, all these different unacknowledged special access programs. The Admiral, Tom Wilson, was able to find out these projects did exist. When he tried to go into them, he says, "Sir, you do not have a need to know." And he says, "The hell I don't. I'm the head of intelligence," And he said to Dr. Greer, quote, "If you can get your people together and go before the media, you have my permission. This group is illegal," quote unquote. And so that's what basically greenlighted the May 9, 2001 National Press Club, of which I partaked as one of the witnesses, of which each one of us stated that we were willing to testify under oath before a congressional hearing.
Now,
so,
I have a question.
That's a little history there.
What good did it do to be in front of the press if the press were controlled by the Cabal?
Well, it didn't get hardly any attention on the mainstream media circuits. And in fact, after I was on CNN with the rest of the witnesses there and everybody and saw what they did, CBS out of Los Angeles wanted to do an interview with me. And I said, "Look, I'm not willing to do this interview unless I can state we have the witnesses within these black projects that can prove we have a solution, a non-polluting solution, and get off of nuclear, oil, and coal and go before an open, secrecy-free hearing." They promised up and down, interviewed me for 45 minutes. Afterward, the producer was almost in tears that I know I promised the higher executives, quote unquote, made me cut that part out. But we know that the higher executives are all part of the intelligence community that's controlled by this cabal that has been spending billions of dollars in the think tanks, working with CIA and intelligence that, there used to be back in 1983, 1984, 50 corporations that controlled everything we see and hear in all the media channels, newspapers, television, radio, everything. Now there's only 5 corporations. They consolidated it down. These corporations, before anything gets released, it gets approved from the highest level of yay or nay. That's why it's kind of interesting back in November of last year when the USS Nimitz incidents of the Tic Tac, the Navy fighter pilots, recorded the UFO on his screen. They gave it the green light, and when they give a green light, that goes on CNN, BBC, New York Times, Washington Post, so forth and so on. All these channels saturate it and make sure that the public got that into awareness. But when we went before the 22 cameras in the back row, what happened was they effectively sanitized it in such a way as to not alert the public. And so they basically control it. But, on the Internet, the alternative media, such as what we're doing, Barbara, it spread like wildfire. I've seen my testimony in several different languages, along with the rest of the wonderful witnesses that testified that day way back 17 years ago. Hard to believe. We disclosed all this to the world 17 years ago, and we're still using gasoline, we're still using nuclear, they've still been suppressing it, but it appears that the White Hats, basically they crossed the line. I think it may have been not only the 1955 agreement with the Nazis, but the 9/11 false flag event crossed the line, and so which is interesting. Right now, there's a current happening right now. There's a grand jury that's reevaluating all the evidence of the 9/11. So, if they expose that, that's going to expose everything that's all connected to. It could be a whole Pandora's box that
that'll win an argument with a lot of. That would win a lot of arguments that I've had over the years on 9/11. So has Trump?
So much evidence.
I know. Has Trump been briefed as to, I mean, when he has Space Patrol, Solar Warden is already out there. Is he aware of that?
I believe I'm speculating that he probably is aware of these things, and that's probably why he created the Space Force. Could be an avenue in order to eventually release these technologies and so forth. Trump was brought in through military intelligence, basically, contacted him and realized that, every year the Bilderberg meeting selects who's going to move forward the agenda next. We've had the Bushes, we've had the Clintons, we've had the Obamas, and now their choice for the president was Hillary Clinton. Surprisingly, Trump won, and there was support from a lot of the white hats within our military intelligence, which the indications are that they didn't want to do a military coup because the corruption was so bad. I won't go into all the things, the pedophilia and the satanic stuff and the creation of ISIS and all that. Let's just say the corruption is so bad that they were planning on doing a military coup, but then they would make it look like it was like an illegal takeover. So they decided to do the rule of law and take down the Cabal, deep state, Illuminati, whatever you want to call them, through the legal process. And so what happened was, and a number of things happened, such as Admiral Mike Rogers, the head of the NSA, he tipped Trump off, that they were using this fake Russian dossier in order to illegally, spy on him, and that basically the White Hats took over the NSA, which, has unparalleled surveillance capability of every communication and backdoors to every software and everything with these quantum computers to analyze everybody. And so they're basically using the NSA's incredible surveillance capability, which was going to be used against us, against them instead. And so, what happened back in late October of last year is that all of a sudden on the 4chan, 8chan anonymous bulletin boards, you have this person called Q. Q is like the highest security clearance, the Q clearance. And so you have QAnon, which has basically been, since the mainstream media is completely controlled and controlling everyone's perceptions, they need to, because Trump is using Twitter, it's driving him crazy, because he can bypass the mainstream media by going to Twitter.
Totally.
Plus QAnon it's starting this whole thing, and people are starting, and the mainstream media is on an all-out war to say there's this crazy right-wing Trump-supporting lunatic fringe conspiracy based on nothing. It's a psyops type of thing that's coming out. But if you follow Q, which I wasn't at first, but as I started looking at it, and I started to say, oh my God, this thing ties back, going all the way back to Eisenhower, setting up this secret Marine intelligence unit. And
now,
there was an indication of this.
Is this a website? Where is QAnon posting?
Oh, well, you can go to, so there's many sites. It's easier to do it through one of the main outlets. If you go to QAnon.pub, that's QANON.pub, it will show you the current postings. And what they've been doing is very cleverly, they're psychologically putting out questions to people, making people think, and saying, well, do you believe in coincidences? And they show all these different things. And there's a whole lot of things that show that whoever the military intelligence group is that's putting out these posts, they're very connected to the White House. And there's also another website called qproofs.com, I think it is. And it shows there's dozens of different things that, like, Q will post something, and the president will do it within a few seconds afterward. Or one of the things that stuck in my mind was the Annons wanted the president to say tippy-top shape, and so after they requested that, the president for the Easter, at the White House, he said, well, for the Easter Bunny, we have a special team that makes sure that everything's in tip-top shape. In fact, we like to call it tippy-top shape. What are the odds of Trump saying that after a request from QAnon? Anyway, that's just one. But if you look at what they're questioning, what they're asking people to think about, and what they're posting of all of the positions in the high levels of the Department of Justice, the FBI, that are being fired and taking out of position. In other words, they're cleaning house. Before they can move forward with if you go back to see the credibility of the highly, I'm just looking at all the evidence. Look at the high probability. Back in December of last year, Trump did an executive order of freezing the assets of anyone doing human rights abuse or corruption, which, read anybody in the Cabal is basically one of the two things they've been doing. Plus, they also changed the Uniform Code of Military Justice for military tribunals, and the fact that we've been at war ever since 9/11, we've been in a state of war, in the longest war in American history, justified by a false flag event.
Yeah.
What's been the groundwork that's being laid, along with John Hoover working with 470 investigators which have amassed. See, normally there's about 90 sealed indictments per month. That's been the average in the past. Lately, for the last year or two, we've been having over 5,000 sealed indictments, where there's now 66,000 sealed indictments, of which each sealed indictment can tag up to 93 people. And what a sealed indictment is a secret grand jury basically is presented this evidence, right? And it's this jury is made up of 1 or 2 dozen people, American citizens, and they look at the evidence presented. And based on the evidence that's presented, if the person is irrefutable evidence that the person is guilty, and then what happens is it creates a sealed indictment. So that what they do, the reason they do these sealed indictments and don't allow it out to the public to know who's being tagged, is because they use this normally for crime syndicate operations, where you have a mafia and you have a whole bunch of different people that are connected. If you start taking out one at a time, they're going to tip off to the other ones, right?
Yeah.
So that they can all run and scurry. It's coming down. They all scurry. And so what they're doing is they're collecting these thousands of sealed indictments. And what's curious is the exact day that Trump did the executive order, which justifies the use of these sealed indictments, was General Mathis went down with $500 million and 1,000 Marine troops, and they have expanded the capacity, the facilities down in Guantanamo Bay. Coincidence? And so these laws for military tribunal justice become active in just a couple of days. Today's the December 27th. January 1st, 2019, these become active. And I know that
66,000 of them.
Well, I don't know what actions are going to be taken, but if you study this and you study the Q posts and what they're saying and all the evidence, there's a tremendous amount of evidence that the mainstream media is scared to death that the public starts to look at and say, oh my God, they can see this criminal, the criminal activities of these people, and their plans. They wanted to start World War III, and the plan is to reduce 90% of the population. They attempted to. They even have their own rogue. They call it like a dark fleet. Their own rogue CIA fleet that they attempted to launch from a submarine to implicate North Korea and start a war with North Korea and nuke Hawaii. They also attempted to do that with Japan, but both times the Air Force Secret Space Program was able to take them out. So, and they've taken out their satellites, they're taking out their computer systems, they are controlling the NSA now, the white hats. There's more white hats than there are black hats, let's put it that way. And so the good news is we're winning. But, how a dangerous animal is cornered into they could try anything. So, but Barbara, when after 17 years, after I went to Washington, actually it was like 2014 that I started to, really because this media company wanted me to write this article that was on the webmatrix.net. I didn't think we had any hope. I didn't think there was a chance because they control all the mainstream media that controls the indoctrination of the public. They control the education. They controlled Hollywood. They control the representatives. When I traveled across the United States, we rented huge halls in major cities, L.A., San Francisco, Boulder, Colorado, Portland, all these different major cities I traveled. We got standing ovations where they, doing the executive briefing for everyone. But, we asked for people to write their representatives. And I stayed up all night with a pizza and a programmer friend, and I created an online fax. And we had 30,000 faxes go into the president and their senators and congress people, and even had one that went to the embassies around the world. So I told people, when you get a response from your congressman or senator, send it to me so I can post it online. So I was one of the administrators for disclosureproject.org, Dr. Greer's original site. And so I posted all of these, which you can see on the webmatrix.net, I posted about 52 of them from the senators, the president, and what it appeared is they all have been indoctrinated with official letters of denial of NASA and Project Blue Book. And so it became clear that, you can imagine if presidents, CIA directors, heads of intelligence are being denied access, they're not going to let, congressmen and senators in on this stuff. And so they just were indoctrinated how to respond. So if our government can't affect any change, our media can't alert the public, which Kennedy told about the importance of the media and the importance of debate and the dangers of official censorship in order to protect for securities in the future, which he was spot on. How could we ever change the situation? When I found out about Q and Trump, they're basically using Trump as an instrument in order. This started decades ago, before it's not about a political party of liberal or conservative, Democrat, Republican, Trump or Hillary. It goes way beyond that. This has been going on for decades to try to get control away from this dark cabal. And so now we have this possibility through the good people in our military and military intelligence that has seized control of the instruments and assets and have identified all their players. And so we may be seeing very soon, I'm in my heart's desire, is to see these technologies released for the good of mankind, and the truth, the full disclosure about the technological development that we're actually at that looks beyond anything in Star Trek. By the way, Star Trek was actually created with the Office of Naval Intelligence through Leslie Stevens, who created the Outer Limits, whose father was Admiral Leslie Stevens, who was a contemporary of Admiral Rick Oboda, who was the one in charge of the Navy spy program that would meet with the Navy spies in Naval Air Station San Diego in a secret room in this tower, along with William Tompkins, who was designated as an information disseminator, who would take this information showing the Draco hieroglyphics and these different manuals and stuff that the U.S. Navy spies were able to bring over, and then take them to Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, universities, into secret think tanks that were attempting to figure all this stuff out. So this is we're at a pivotal point in history. It's an incredible time to be alive, because we're right on this edge of where we can take back our planet. And it could be a most wonderful, it could be a renaissance.
Oh, absolutely. But what will happen if these sealed indictments are suddenly enacted upon? What will that do to our economy? What will that do to the stock market? I mean, I would imagine it would crash.
Well, think about our whole system. The Rothschild-based central banks that have been infiltrated in and control just about every bank on the planet, except for North Korea, Iran, and some other places. Ever since 1913, when they started with the Federal Reserve, our dollar is worth like 1 cent compared to what it was worth when it was backed by gold. Now, Lincoln attempted to get us off of the Federal Reserve. We know what happened to Abraham Lincoln, who was assassinated by James Wilkes Booth, a 33rd degree Freemason. Kennedy, besides, he was planning on getting us out of the Vietnam War, so I wouldn't have to go there in 1969 in combat action. He was also planning on getting us out of the Federal Reserve and backing our money with, with silver or gold, have some kind of substance. They just print money out of thin air. It's not based on anything. So if Trump was able to get us back, let's say hypothetically, if he was able to get us out of the Federal Reserve, of which he's been on constant war with lately, and get us our money backed on gold, that would totally destroy this Federal Reserve. It would give us great abundance. The technology, we could, desalinate oceans. We could stop the geoengineering, the weather warfare, so we don't have fires in the west and flooding in the east. We can, it'd be it'd be a radical change. And one of the main things is the my great-grandfather was the president of the Homeopathic Medical Society, and which was going up against Rockefeller had the allopathic. And even my mother was cured, which the doctor said she would surely die from if I took her to this nutritional therapy, which they murdered him. Max Gerson claimed his death, even though it was strychnine poisoning, was due to cancer, the American Cancer Society. She was cured of the cancer, and she lived to be 91 years old. And so we have this medical system that basically they have gone in and they basically write the books. The pharmaceutical corporations write the books for the doctors, and they basically become like pimps for the pharmaceutical, because it's so much money keeping people on these drugs rather than curing the actual cause of disease, which they have in these technologies where they can, our bodies are energetic. They're an energy matrix, and it's linked to our consciousness. And another exciting positive aspect of transformation is that people are starting to become aware, people who dig deep into metaphysics and into quantum physics and like that, becoming aware that each one of us is like a fractal of a larger great mind, and that what we do to change ourselves, you can't change one part of a hologram without affecting every part of the hologram. And, I keep seeing it everywhere I look, from people who I wouldn't even expect. I had an older couple that a friend said that they needed a security system. They live way out in the wilderness, and I started talking to them. I found out they just finished watching Above Majestic, and they were like totally into Q and all this stuff. I mean, people here, older couple like in their 80s,
Wow.
it's like people who you wouldn't even imagine. There is definitely this morphogenic field in which they found ages ago, before the internet, that people would have ideas, inventions, or ideas in fashion or art or whatever, and people would have on the other side of the planet have the exact, kind of the 100th monkey type of thing, where our collective mind, which you can see it everywhere in nature, birds and bees and insects and animals, they all have a collective mind, just like we do. And as we are waking up, how we can change this is our awareness of this and realizing that these technologies have been withheld from humanity and that we can start to heal this planet, release these technologies, shut down these dangerous nuclear power plants, and we can go into space, and that these satanic, pedophile, doing human sacrificing, all, sucking out adrenochrome out of children that are terrified as they sacrifice them. They use it as a drug. All the illegal drug operations that they use for unaccounted for funding. And, it's, as you mentioned earlier in the show, that Donald Rumsfeld, the day before 9/11, says, we cannot account for $2.3 trillion. Well, we know that in 2015, there was an audit on the Pentagon. They can't account for $6.5 trillion. Trillion dollars. $1 trillion is 1,000 billion dollars. I mean, that's a lot of money. And and there's even figures that are going up to 21 trillion. And where do all this money go? They go into these secret black projects that have been withholding these technologies, all these decades.
Well, what gets me is, aren't these dark entities at the heads of all these corporations and the news media?
Yeah, it's the it's the very, just like on our dollar bill, we have a pyramid with an eye on top of it. If you control the top of a pyramid, such as the President of the United States, for example, which is the Commander-in-Chief, there is no military officer above the Commander-in-Chief. Whatever he says goes down. The same way if you have somebody in the heads of the Department of Justice and the FBI, any structure, you have the Food and Drug Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency. If you have your people that support Monsanto or whatever, or particular drugs, and all of a sudden other holistic health doctors, dozens of them mysteriously die from suicide or whatever. Yeah. It kind of indicates that the people that are in the top of the pyramid in these agencies are in alignment with this cabal agenda. And so this is what has been going on behind the scenes that Q has been indicating to people, is that they've been cleaning house. You can't bring these people to justice right away until you get the elements that would, at the high positions, that would actually protect them and not allow justice to happen. They have to be removed first. And that's why there's been this unprecedented, anybody who researches this knows this is true. There's all these people that have been boom, 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 eliminated one after another, that are in these high positions, that once they are cleared out and we've got the good people, the white hats in these high positions, then we can, once the sealed indictments are released, these people get immediately arrested, and probably Guantanamo Bay is their next destination.
Wow. That's a comfort. Because I think what has bothered me so much is that I've seen so much happening where that someone has broken the law and nothing happens to them. It's like there's a separate law for them. I mean, it's in politics. It's in all levels of whatever. And the Supreme Court judge that died suddenly, you can't tell me that he died naturally. And the fact that, he was immediately cremated and there was no autopsy and the whole thing. I don't know why they killed him, but they did. And you won't convince me that he died naturally.
Oh, yeah.
But,
so long as they have their people in position, the criminals can get away with, suiciding people. They can, and it gets covered up. The main challenge that we have right now, Barbara, is psychological. How do you deal with a massive population that, I monitor the mainstream media, CNN and CBS and all those. I see what they say, and as anybody who does observe what the mainstream media does, constantly demonizing Trump and any action. If he went to Syria, then he's demonized for going to war in Syria. If he pulls the troops out of Syria, then he's demonized for giving ISIS a big gift, as what the Washington Post mentioned. So no matter what he does, he's demonized, constantly to put this negative image into, he's not perfect, and he's done a lot of things that I don't approve of. I wonder about, he's approving offshore drilling for oil when, there's this technologies that we don't need this stuff, and going into national parks and approving 5G. There's technologies that are much more healthy to the environment. If he's being used as an instrument to take down this cabal, I just overlooking this thing. Thank God we don't have the Bilderberg choice, or else we could have been in World War III already.
Absolutely. There's no question about that. So I'm really glad that the American public decided they wanted to have something different. and I think they probably didn't realize quite how different it was going to be. But I have to be a cheerleader for the fact that he pulled it out of the fire, and he seems to be a very genuine person, human, but very genuine. So if this can happen, and as you said today, and as you said in the documentary, we really are on the precipice of this. I mean, the fact that there are 66,000 sealed indictments already, and you're not the only one, so that it means that people should be watching their backs, if they've been on the other side, and be aware of the fact that their time is possibly coming to an end when they can commit crimes and walk away from them. So I think it's going to be extreme
panic is probably an understatement. That's
I would
going on.
say when the first of these are cleared and people are starting to be arrested, there's going to be a lot of upset. And it may destabilize us for just a little while, but I think that when it gets to the point where suddenly people are realizing that we're coming out of a time of, this is actually the dark ages that we're in, and
absolutely,
and the fact that we've been denied so much information, denied so much technology, denied the fact that we actually are in space and hopefully doing good. Somebody spoke on the video about traveling to the edge of the universe and discovering other planets that were similar to Earth.
Oh,
do you recall
that was my friend Mark McCandish, who was one of the witnesses that joined me back in 2001, where in 1989 it was witnessed 3 flying saucers that were titled alien reproduction vehicles that were built back in the 1950s that could go faster than the speed of light. Yeah, he says that basically they've been able to go, it takes them about 20 minutes to go from this galaxy over to the Andromeda galaxy, and they have already identified 8 Earth-like planets that have human life on it. That's very similar to Earth. And so, this is incredible. They say they worry about the overpopulation and things like that. If we have technology, we could colonize other areas. The thing is that the psychological impact of this, me even being a top secret witness that, has been involved in this for some time, I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around what sounds like the most bizarre science fiction movie ever. But if Q mentioned that if once this stuff comes out, they may, for a short period of time, declare martial law, because there's probably going to be riots and things in the street. Trump is being a Hitler dictator, fascist, he's trying to take over our country and all this stuff. But actually, the exact opposite is true. The exact opposite is that we're incarcerating these dark, evil elements that very sick individuals that have been hijacking our planet for decades and putting an end to it. So it's like the greatest celebration ever.
Oh, absolutely. And I do predictions every year for I do an overview, and then I give predictions for every month. And I've seen martial law. I've seen riots. I've seen, but all for the good. Though there is a riot, it feels like it was for a positive reason. And, so many people, when faced with the truth, go into denial and then rant against it and then eventually come round. But yeah, I would say that for a lot of people who don't have imagination, it will be a very, very hard thing to swallow and deal with. But you know, the most important thing, and you mentioned it earlier, that when there has been communication with ETs back from the 40s and probably even beyond, that we were supposed to we should be able to grow spiritually and expand consciousness, and when you do that, you see your reality in a whole new perspective. And you know, are your eyes totally clear? No, because you have to deprogram yourself. We've all been programmed to believe one way, and deprogramming yourself is tough.
We need to look at all the ideologies and belief systems that we've bought into that separate us. We need to look at ourselves as the human race, as spiritual beings. I know there's been so much conflict on the planet, but you know, if the riots do occur, and if the Marine Corps hasn't come in and taken over control of the infiltrated, controlled mainstream media, then most likely the mainstream media, if it goes on its current course, will, like CNN and the rest of them, will spin the information to make Trump look like a Hitler dictator is trying to do something bad. There is a way of bypassing it. It's called the emergency broadcast system, which me being an ex broadcast engineer, we had to set that up for the station. Every single network, cable, television, radio channel, all communications channels can be overridden with the emergency broadcast system, or emergency alert system, is EAS is the other name they call it, that the president can speak directly to the public through that means. So that's another avenue that they can use in order to let the public know that there is a military operation, a legal military operation going on. Thousands of people that are involved in human rights abuse and deep-level corruptions are being rounded up, and I don't know how much is going to be televised, but just like in Nazi Germany, when they had the Nuremberg trials, think of it. There was only 1,800 sealed indictments for the Nazi trials. There are 66 way over 66,000 now. This would be the Washington trials that's going to come out.
So now the sealed indictments are not suggestions that someone's committed a crime, but they are a crime has been committed and this needs to be put on trial. Is that it? In other words, it's not
the sealed indictments are where a secret grand jury presents the evidence to a dozen or 2 dozen U.S. citizens and a jury, and they look at all the evidence, and if they say, yes, this person is definitely guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt, they create a sealed indictment with that person's name on it, or up to 93 people connected with this thing. And so when it gets unsealed, the person has already been tried, and so what happens is they go before a court, and then they are tried, and then they're sentenced to if found guilty. And so when these sealed indictments come out, that's when they're probably all going to. My speculation is they don't want to tip everyone off, although they know who they are, They'll probably do it all at once.
Wow. What kind of a court do they go in front of? Is it a military court? Is it a civil court? What kind of a court?
Excellent question, Barbara. Well, because remember Leslie Graham was talking to Judge Kavanaugh, and they were talking about, this was televised on mainstream media, that he was talking about ever since 9/11, because we've been in a state of war, and because of the new amendments that were made to the Uniform Code of Military Justice earlier this year, what happens is that civilians can now be tried in a military tribunal court. And so there's going to be military and civilian trials that will be in a military court. So yes, you're correct.
Wow. That's going to be interesting, because the rules are different in the military court.
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with the Uniform Code of Military Justice, being, I was 4 years in the Navy, and it treats it a little bit differently.
A lot differently. I wouldn't want to be in front of one of them and be guilty.
No, high treason, death penalty.
Wow. That's going to be scary. That's going to be very scary.
Yeah.
To my mind,
when the public
there are
sees
people,
the crimes that these people have done, it's going to be a rude awakening for a lot of people.
I would say that even if they have personal lawyers, they're out of luck. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting time. I'm really glad I'm here to see it. Hopefully, it's about time, and it means that we can sort. I would say there will be a year or 2 or 3 that is very disoriented before things calm down a little bit, but it's going to be very interesting. I know that probably the form of government we have is going to be changed as well.
Well, as Eisenhower in his warning address, farewell address that he gave in 1961, he said, "Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can protect our future liberties and freedoms." So that's you listeners out there. The more alert and knowledgeable people that realize that, oh my God, we have been indoctrinated into this false matrix of perception. There's a complete other reality going on, and it's going to be it's going to be a bit of a hard learning curve for a lot of people, but eventually I'm assuming they're going to bring out indisputable proof of this situation, which people are going to be shaking their heads, but they have to come to the undeniable conclusion that this is real.
Oh yeah. No, it's been out there for a long time. I think everybody probably suspects something is up, but they don't really know exactly what. And if we get full disclosure, it is going to destabilize everybody. But I think it's going to be also an exciting time, and a time when you realize what is then available to you. Hopefully the spirituality comes along with it, that you begin to understand how much more we're capable of and how much more we can do and how much greater this planet can be. Not just this country, but this planet.
This has been the message of the ETs going all the way back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s. They want us to work on our spirituality, to raise our consciousness. And they want us to, they want the technologies released to the world, because you can imagine, anti-gravity gets released, every single home and business have a zero-point energy device. We no longer have the threat of millions of people dying because of corona mass ejection. You've got a whole planet now we can clean up of decades of destruction. It's going to be a renaissance that the world has never seen the likes of before.
Yeah, I know. And so many people go around thinking, we are the most powerful, we are the most enlightened, and we're not. We've been in the dark for so long. I'm horrified at the history books. Our past has been covered up. The antiquity has been covered up. And not only that, but I don't even know what I suspect is our history is really our history. I mean, even the origins and the foundations of religions are going to be put in question. It's going to be a confusing time, even for people who see it coming.
Yeah, you look at all the connections of the Vatican and the Nazis. There's even, you can go to the CIA website. There's even a document that they put a secrecy order for 25 years that connects the CIA with the Vaticans and the Nazis, and they all work together. They gave thousands of passports to allow them to escape to Argentina and Antarctica. Well, Argentina mostly,
Yeah.
down there. But, it's... I think awareness, there's a lot of different camps in all this stuff. There's a lot of people who study Q, but they have no idea of the extraterrestrial connection with all this and this, the secret government with that. And there's other people who, religious people who think they're all demons, and there's other people who in the ET community that think, all the ETs are benevolent and good throughout the galaxy. And so you have all these different... fortunately, most of them are good, and the ones that are like the Nordics, they have greater advanced, the more spiritually advanced and evolved races which are benevolent, they have greater technology than the ones that are predatory, which is a good thing, So
I would say,
yeah, the universe is moving toward a more positive, benevolent timeline. As we evolve spiritually, it's going to move in a more, rather than enslavement. The other direction is complete planetary enslavement, which is, and eugenics and enslavement. That's the Draco and the Nazi plan. That was, but all that's circumvented thanks to the good people within our military and working together for the last several decades in order to make this happen. And it's going to happen probably in the next month or two.
Well, the movie is called Above Majestic. It's on Amazon, and I highly recommend you guys pay for it. I think I saw it on YouTube as well. And your website is webmatrix.net. And
no, it's not on YouTube. It's not on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
It's only on iTunes and on Amazon Prime, and maybe on other outlets. But it was the #1 documentary, and thousands of people have seen it, and it's a big red pill to swallow.
It's an amazing movie, and I'm certainly going to watch it, a few more times. It's going to be interesting to see how we can check off things as they start to happen and watch something evolve that has never happened before in our history. I want to thank you, Dan, for being here and for doing such a great job of laying all this out for us. We're down to the last couple of seconds, so thank you so much, and we're going to have to do this again sometime.
I look forward. The webmatrix.net is my website on these notes. It's not the only authoritative site, but it's just sharing my notes, and it's always a pleasure, Barbara. I'm glad we hit a lot of important points on today's show.
Me too. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening. This has been